Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Torah and Psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post of Pasha's Pinchos is going to discuss feminism. In this week's Pasha, we read about the daughters of Salafchad, who at the time, the ruling was that only the sons would inherit their father's land, and the daughters of Salafchad self-advocated and championed their cause in order to inherit the land of their father. And what we see here is a monumental moment, both a legal and social revolution that gave women the right to also inherit their father's land in certain situations. And this was a monumental moment where we see feminism being expressed for the first time, that women who at that time were not entitled to inherit their father's land, and it would only go to the sons. They were now given the authority and were given the right to inherit their father's land. This is what we see in terms of feminism, the development of the feministic movement in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is we see that this was a social group, women who were at the time were in a position where they didn't have any rights. They were subjugated to a certain sense, or were in a minority position, that they weren't able to express their rights, they weren't able to have certain rights and equality as men within society. The society had been created as a patriarchal society that was dominated by the male position and the male authority. And the feministic movement and feminism has tried to develop gradually through the years in order to strengthen the cause of women and to give them the authority and the right that they also are entitled to. And then, if we look at this from a Torah perspective, first of all, there's a discussion with Soloveitchik when he discusses the idea of women learning Torah. And he actually expresses an interesting idea. He says that nowadays, when he's speaking in today's world, he says it's important and necessary for women to learn Torah. That he says that women should learn Torah, and they should learn Torah in depth, and they should learn Torah in the scripture and the written Torah and the Mefarshim, and they should have a deep understanding of learning Torah. And he explains why this is. And he says if you go back in the previous generations, the model in a sense of women's learning, or Torah learning, was basically in a sense it was based on copying the example they had seen in their home. He said that the women and the girls and the daughters would learn from the example of their mother. They would see how their mother acts in the home, they would see how their mother prepares things, and they would learn the halachas and the rulings of Torah in a vicarious way, in a sense, through observation. And they would see how their mother acts, how they prepare food at home, how they prepare the home, how they conduct themselves, and how the mother lives a life of Torah. This would be the example, and this would be sufficient, in a sense, for women in those days. So he says today, in a more, I guess in a sense he was saying a more educated and enlightened world, women need more. In the sense he was saying that women would not suffice with just learning from example, whereas in today's world, women need a in-depth and detailed knowledge, in a sense, because that is what they require. It's based on an intellectual drive in today's world, and perhaps that is in itself is a development from feminism, that women have a different position in today's society, and therefore also in the Torah sense, in Torah learning, this is also has a knock-on effect, and that women also want and require and need an in-depth, detailed understanding of Torah through learning the actual texts. And in this sense, this will help them to develop and to express and to follow a Torah life. And from a psychological perspective, let's look at feminism has also influenced the world of therapy and psychology. Because as we said, feminism developed out of a male-dominated society, a patriarchal society. And we see this in the literature and the research in sense of domestic violence. That the literature is dominated, there's a monopoly in the domestic violence literature of male violence on women. And this, in a sense, is because the male position in society and the male position in the home is one of authority, and one of that they have a greater authority that is expressed in the sense of domestic violence through power and control. And this leads to abuse and leads to violence in the home. And that's why this is the general focus and the general mindset of the literature in domestic violence. And the feminist movement has tried and has succeeded in giving focus to this through the literature, giving a voice to the domestic violence that is against women. Although in more recent times, there has been a focus and understanding that men also suffer from domestic violence. And there has been a criticism in the sense that the feministic movement has prevented and has blocked the ability for research to follow in this line, so that research should be able to focus also on the violence against men. But the feminist movement argue that any violence that is expressed by a woman against a man is actually just a retaliation. It's after years of suffering from domestic violence and suffering from abuse from a man against a woman, and their retaliation is what happens when the man then suffers abuse in return. So we see how domestic violence has been influenced both in promoting and also creating a complex understanding of domestic violence. And nowadays, in a sense, researchers are acknowledging this, and rather than some researchers prefer to be called domestic violence researchers rather than feminist or feministic researchers. And also in family therapy, there's feministic family therapy that is focused primarily or originally on women in the family dynamics and the family system, to try to give them a position, try to give them a voice, to understand the difficulties both from society and within the family system, and in trying to give them more authority and trying to champion their cause. But also now, in more recent times, feministic family therapy is actually focusing on anybody that is coming from a minority group or is discriminated against. And the therapy is trying to help them and to give them the tools and to give them the voice that will help them to, both on an individual level and also from a systemic point of view, to give them a greater power and control and to give them the rights that they deserve within the system that we're discussing, whether it's societal, whether it's a family system, or as an individual as well. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.